Good afternoon and welcome. Today I am joined by Ben Saldivar, and he is a physiotherapist, ACL expert, and also the founder of the ACL Rehab Online. So Ben, how are you doing?
Hey Andy, yeah, good, thank you. Thanks so much for having me on.
No problem. So we had a bit of a chat beforehand. So where are you speaking from today?
So currently I'm in Lisbon in Portugal. At the moment, or for the last kind of couple of years, I've been working fully remotely within the ACL space. And so the last kind of couple of years, I suppose, since then, I've been thinking about potentially moving and working remotely somewhere for a few months of the year. And yeah, so this is a bit of a test run at the moment. I'm going to spend a few weeks in Lisbon, going to head up to Porto and probably spend a bit of time kind of touring around a little bit as well. But yeah, still working as normal. But yeah, thought we'd try something a bit different for a few months.
Very good. Yeah, the only time I've been to Portugal is two stag do's, both about a month away from each other. So one was in Lisbon, one was in Porto. But I just think they're great cities.
Yeah, I've actually never been to Portugal before. So it was kind of, we were just wondering, where's a good place to go, try this kind of thing out. And we were thinking sunshine, good food, good weather, close to the beach. You can't really miss, I don't think. So it's been great. It's been really nice to, finish up work and head out and explore a little bit, try some, interesting food, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, and plenty of beautiful scenery on the coastline as well. So going to try and explore a bit more of that over the next few weeks.
Very good. Very good. Great. So getting back to you then. So where are you from originally?
So I'm from Cornwall originally. Yeah, born right down in the southwest, not far from Penzance, kind of Penzance St Ives kind of area. So a million miles from pretty much anywhere. But yeah, born down there. So my mum's originally from Cornwall, but my dad is from Belize in Central America. He kind of came over when he was 18 for a work placement, and yeah, they met then, and then me and my two brothers grew up down there.
Right. And so did you had all of your childhood down there?
Yeah, so spent was yeah, pretty much until university, where I went up to London. I went to Brunel University. But yeah, Cornwall was an interesting place to grow up. I think when you're a kid, you're obviously thinking, I want to get out of here and go to somewhere a bit more exciting. And then when you get a little bit older, it's kind of the place where you're like, okay, yeah, this is pretty nice to be able to go down and visit relatives and spend some time down there in the summer. So yeah, before coming out to Portugal, I actually went down and just stayed at home for about 6 weeks, which was again like really nice just to enjoy a bit of scenery down there. But yeah.
Right. Another person who's done really well online, who's based that neck of the woods, is Mehmet Jem. Don't know if you just.
Yeah, I've not. We've spoken a little bit back and forth on Instagram. I know he's friends with Charlie Goodchild and Andy, who are some former colleagues of mine from Pure Sports Medicine. But yeah, it seems like and I think Andrew McCauley as well. You had on the podcast.
Yeah,
He's
yeah.
far from me as well. But yeah, it seems like there's a few people popping up down in the southwest.
Yeah, we're doing some work with Andrew now. Great guy, really. Yeah, he's really good, and it's really interesting to see how all these sort of come from that physio background, but then getting into these different ways of delivering the message and how each of you have done it. So no, it's really cool, and it's good to hear that you're sort of networking with those guys as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's yeah, I suppose from a social media perspective, that was something that got into probably really when COVID started. I was working at Pure Sports Medicine at the time, which was a great environment to be in, and encouraged by some of my colleagues really, as kind of all the COVID situation came into, to start posting a little bit more about an area of interest. And ACLs was something that I had already started to build up relatively big caseload with at Pure, and work with some surgeons in London and all that kind of stuff. And I think I've spoken to a few student physios or new grad physios asking about how do you get into certain specialties, and no one's necessarily going to give you permission to get started in one specific area or the other. It's just about, if it's something that you really enjoy or there's a sport that you're really passionate about, just start learning as much as you can about it. If you can post something on social media, the amount of opportunities and network that you build just from being able to say, yeah, this is kind of my thing. It was really surprising to me, I think. So it's been a great experience to network, and we all know that physios love to use social media as a helpful tool. So it's great to connect with some of those guys.
So did you not have any idea at all that was of what you wanted it to become? So did you envision that you would be sat on the beach in Lisbon in 3 years' time when you were doing it?
No, absolutely not. So as much as I'd love to be, I'm not sat on a sun lounger all day, kind of, sending people exercise programs. But yeah, in terms of when first starting, it was very much okay. So obviously went into lockdown. We were on furlough as kind of a team, or most of us were at Pure, and just really set the Instagram up just as a kind of way to keep my kind of interest going in the area. And what happened was people started to message. Just a friend of a friend of a friend, I think, was the first one that messaged saying, I can't get into my NHS at the moment. There's no MSK appointments available. Like, my knee is pretty wrecked. This guy was on crutches for 6 months or something like that, trying to get some help. And he just said, can you give me a hand? And I had some friends who did online training, like online personal training. One friend who'd done online physio for a few years. And so, I got in touch with them and said, how does this work? Is this something that I could potentially do? And yeah, basically messaged the guy back and was like, yeah, I can set something up in the next few days and let's give it a go and see how it goes. And then it was kind of a good environment from my side of things. Obviously, there's a lot of terrible things going on, but a lot of people were struggling to get support. And I think that online service really bridged the gap for quite a lot of people while they were not able to access other services.
Yeah. And so at what point did you start to think, actually, this could be something that I could do full time, or certainly a core income generation tool for you?
Yeah, it's a good question, really. I think it was quite a gradual thing. I remember getting the first kind of 2 or 3 clients, and I was like, okay, this is pretty good. This is, something of interest. And then I think I probably had about 5 or 6 clients, and was put in touch with a guy called Frank Benedetto, who's a guy originally from New Jersey. He's a physio by background, really great guy, but he was setting up a mentorship program just in the middle of COVID, basically. And his background was setting up in-person clinics. He had about 7 or 8 in-person clinics. He built them up, he'd sold them, and then he started a virtual combat sport and MMA strength and conditioning and physiotherapy service. And this was kind of like 5 years before COVID. And so he'd actually built that business up to quite a successful business with a team and, working with fighters, professional MMA fighters, all this kind of stuff, as well as amateur athletes. And so what the mentorship is called the Honey Badger Project, was set up as was something to help people during COVID to maybe create a kind of either a hybrid service, being a mixture of digital and in-person service, or even fully online. And so I remember having a chat with him, and the course wasn't particularly expensive, but at the time, obviously, there wasn't a lot of money going around. There was COVID, everything had been impacted, and I was really nervous about signing up to this thing. And I was like, hey, I can't really commit to more than a month at a time, really, at this point, because I've only got a few clients, all these kinds of uncertainties. And, getting plugged into that system, I was suddenly in a community of people who were doing the exact same thing as me. We had Zoom calls on an almost daily basis, talking about business and marketing and sales, and like how to actually create a digital service that's not just taking online physio and in-person physio and putting it online, but actually utilizing various bits of technology. And how can we actually rethink the way that physiotherapy is delivered, and create a service that actually really targets specific niches of patients. And so being around that environment was awesome. It was a really good opportunity for me to see, I suppose, what's possible with people that are a bit further ahead. And yeah, by the time I suppose I was going back to Pure, was at a place where we had about 30 ACLs, I think, in the program then, and didn't really have enough time really to commit to the role that I was in previously. So within a couple of months of going back off furlough, got to a place where actually it was like, well, I either want to stick with a little bit of online stuff and do in-person stuff alongside, or do I want to grow this into something a bit bigger? So yeah, I think went back to Pure at the end of 2020, I think it was, and then yeah, kind of left there. As much as it was a brilliant place to work, I'd be happily still work there now. But February or March, I think, was when I kind of finished up fully.
Did you get any advice from other people about like maybe doing that, or did you talk it through with people when you decided to do it? Because it's quite a big thing, I guess, to kind of leave, like you say, a good job and set something up that's potentially a fad.
Yeah, I think, did I get any advice? I mean, yeah, I've got a good group of people, I would say, who are who are quite forward thinking, I suppose, in terms of the industry. And I think at the time with COVID, there was still lockdowns going on, there was still gym closures, there was still a lot of restrictions. And I think the demand for support and virtual services was kind of still increasing. And I suppose it kind of, aligned with where I saw myself going in the long term, because I've always had a bit of an interest in potentially working for myself, setting up something from a business perspective. I think marketing, creating products, things like that has always been something that I've been interested in, and kind of almost went into that side of things instead of going down the physio route initially, actually. And so I think it was very much, there was another opportunity to kind of get involved just on like a part-time kind of casual basis with a Premier League academy, and I was like, this is awesome, I'd love to do this. And then I kind of got there and I was like, this would be great, but is it going to take away from what the main focus is? And I think really doing what I'm doing now aligns with not just me as a physio, but also the other things that I enjoy, in terms of what I wanted to get out of a career, I suppose.
So then, when you were defining what this was going to be, how did you what have you got a mission statement, or what is it? How do you define exactly what it is, or articulate it to people when they meet you?
Yeah, so I guess our focus is we help people get back to the things that they love after ACL injury, is in a nutshell. And unfortunately, we know that there's, I suppose, two groups of people after ACL injury, and a big group of people never get back to doing what they want to be able to do. Probably about 60% do get back to a similar level of activity as they were before, but 40% never do. And we know that those that do go back, there's a really high re-injury rate as well. And so some people are they're spending maybe 12 months waiting for surgery, 12 months rehabbing their ACL, and then they go back, and maybe it's the first week or it's the first month or the first year, and they do the exact same thing again, and then we're back to square one. But we also know that there's a lot of data now coming out to show actually what does good ACL rehab look like? What is it? What do people who have a good outcome have in common? What are those key things that maybe we as therapists, as strength and conditioning coaches, what can we provide which is going to put people on the right path a bit more predictably than maybe what is often offered elsewhere. So I think that was the thinking behind what we do. One of the big things that we started in that mentorship right from the very beginning was which was really impactful, was a life design. And so pretty much when we were designing the business, when I was designing the business and inside the mentorship, Frank, who was running it, said, look, you don't want to necessarily create yourself just a really busy job where you're stressed out all the time, and he gave an example of when he had his in-person clinics, he put them in various different locations, and he ended up, after a few years, they was all really successful, but he spent all of his time driving from one location to the other, and he was like, is this really what I want for my career? And I think that's, again, it's been stressful, it's been tough at times, but trying to create a business which works with where I want my life to actually end up was a really nice way of looking at things, I think. And then obviously as well, then diving deep into the specific avatar or like specific client that we potentially have. So really sitting down at the beginning and not just thinking, oh, we want to set up an ACL service. What does an ACL service look like? But really digging into the psychographic and the demographic of the clients that we wanted to work with. And for us, I suppose, our niche is people who really want to get back to sport. That's what we're passionate about. But we also have a lot of people who are, either they're not that fussed about getting back to sport, they're just trying to get back to exercise, or they've got some other form of activity that they enjoy doing, like hiking or whatever it might be. And so, yeah, I suppose that's kind of the passion, is thinking, all right, what do these people really need, not just from an exercise perspective, but from a coaching and a motivation and a psychological and nutrition and all of those kinds of things. How can we bundle that up into a service that really supports people through this really tough journey, basically?
Yeah, that's interesting. Then, so in terms of that package, then is it set packages that you've got? Is it bespoke? How does that work?
Yeah, so it's all kind of rolled up into one, really. There's certain elements that we don't really go into a lot of detail, so we'll give general kind of advice around things like nutrition, There's we do have a couple of kind of external partners from a nutrition perspective and a sports psychology perspective that we refer kind of in and out of. But in terms of how it works as a service, the main thing that I say to people interested is that our focus is just about trying to remove uncertainty from your recovery. And there is a lot of uncertainty. There's tons of questions about what does this surgery mean versus this. I've had an ACL or a meniscus or whatever it might be. And so it's about, I suppose, answering those questions around, what can you be doing on a daily basis to keep you moving forward? So we provide people with fully structured kind of performance plans, so rehab, strength and conditioning. That's all delivered via an app. And then we support them through that. So we do that through a mixture of messenger support, video feedback, and Zoom calls. And it's just about, again, whichever person, depending on what they like, what kind of feedback they like, what kind of stage they are in their recovery, what issues they're facing, about tailoring the support based on, what they feel they need. But yeah, online is a bit different, right? It's not the same as in person. So it's trying to make up for maybe what you miss out of in person by using a bit of a closer touch system with like messenger support and things like that.
Oh yeah, no, it's really, really interesting. Have you had much pushback from the other clinicians in the industry in terms of that not being physical?
And I wouldn't say so. Not really. I think I imagine that there would be quite a lot of pushback from certain kinds of people, but I think something that Paul, who's a member of the team, and myself were talking about recently was often you get a look when you say, oh, we do virtual ACL rehab. And a couple of other members of the team have said the same thing, is that when you tell people, they're like, oh, how does that work? You can't do it online. That's impossible. But that's just what happens when there's a new kind of service of some kind being brought in, right? I think, there's not an element of that. Not all injuries I don't think would work perfectly with it, but I think with ACLs, because of the element of coaching and programming, that's I think I would say for me personally, I think I get better results online than I did in person.
That's really interesting. Yeah, no, it sounds great, and it's really good to hear of good things coming out of COVID, which we know wasn't the best, but it's been a lot of interesting developments in that time. So, what made you want to get into physio in the first place?
That's a good question. What made me want to get into physio? So I think initially I was always kind of interested in sciences and the body and things like that. I think initially, if I think back to when I was 13 and 14, I was always interested in medical side of things. I think being a paramedic was my initial kind of plan from when I was a kid. And then I kind of thought, when I looked at the job, I was like, it's an amazing job, highly respect those people, but just from like unsociable hours and that kind of, it's a very demanding job as well. So I think I kind of looked to what else was available and did a bit of experience with some local physios and things like that. And yeah, I guess I kind of went into it thinking it fits a lot of boxes. I never had a major injury myself or really kind of experienced physio, up close and personal. But it was something that I think wrapped up the communication side of things, the science side of things, a bit of sport, which I was obviously always interested in as well. So yeah, it kind of, I guess, fell into it a little bit. Glad I made the decision when I did.
Yeah, it's difficult, isn't it? It's like I was a similar sort of position, really. It's like, well, how do you decide what you want to do? Because it's quite a big decision. Like you talked about, you're interested in marketing, and how do you decide to decide that? Most of the people that I asked that question to have had some sort of injury, or they've been playing a sport and then they've, that sort of thing. But it's quite nice to hear that it's like actually, sort of, I don't know, really, just these things happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And even, as I was going through physio, like in uni, I think in my second year, I was still umming and ahhing about it really in terms of, is this the right thing for me? Where do I want to go down? And I think there was just an element, I suppose, of not really knowing what was out there. I think obviously going on placements and things like that was great. I think I was always a kind of MSK is my thing from the very beginning. And so it was quite tough going through uni thinking, I'm going to have to spend 2-3 years working in these different environments that I know that I don't really want to end up in terms of like from a rotational perspective. And then I remember meeting a physio who graduated a couple of years before me, and he'd actually gone straight into an MSK role. I just randomly bumped into him on the train in London, and he was like, "Yeah, you don't need to necessarily do rotations. You know, they're a great thing to do for a lot of people, but if you're dead set on going down one specific road, then you know you could actually just go straight into an MSK job." And that kind of like blew my mind. I was like, oh my goodness, this is exactly what I want to hear. So that's kind of the route that I ended up going down. But yeah, I remember having a meeting with my tutor in second year, thinking, you know, I don't think this is for me. So I'm very glad that I stuck with it, and I'm really happy and love it now. But yeah, it's a tricky process trying to figure out what you want to be able to do.
Yeah, no, it definitely is, and yeah, I think that it is good to hear that you can do those different routes, and certainly for people coming through now that there's no bursary there, so I think it's a slightly different thing again, isn't it? Where you know that previously was kind of the norm, but now certainly with the NHS the way it is, it's the private world and the online world, whatever it may be, it's definitely shifted quite extensively. Yeah. So and then from there, then, so what did you do? What you kind of said, right, okay, that's quite exciting. I could go in to do that. Was that then the time that you thought, actually, I'll stick with this and look at private work?
Yeah. So in terms of the NHS, there weren't that many available roles from an MSK perspective, but I was really fortunate to get a position with formerly Crystal Palace Physio Group, which I think are now under Vita Health. Yeah, so down in South London. And what was really great for me from that side of things was it was all NHS patients, or it was actually, I think I was in a split role of occupational health, but you know, 3 days a week seeing NHS MSK patients. And I think working in the NHS is just completely invaluable, and the type of patients that you see just teaches you just an absolutely ridiculous amount on a daily basis. And when you're a new grad physio, right, you're just like a sponge. Every little thing you see and experience, you're just trying to figure out what the hell's going on most of the time, and which may not always be the best situation for the patients sometimes. But yeah, that was a really good environment. It was a great team. We had some really good you know, ESP type practitioners working in the same kind of corridor as us, as our kind of junior physios. We had some good supervisors, you know, great CPD, and it was a private company, but it was a really nice blend of seeing, okay, this is private, but it's also outsourced. You know, it was outsourced NHS stuff as well. So yeah, had, I suppose, a nice mixture of the two really down there. And the other part of that role on top of NHS was occupational health. So private, very similar to a private practice. You're just we worked in different places like the Financial Times and other various businesses in London, and then staff would come in, see us, book in. So it was a bit more like a private practice there, which again was quite nice to get a bit of exposure to that. But I think the complex nature of working with your more traditional NHS patient was really valuable at that time.
And how long were you in that role for?
So I kind of job hopped a little bit in the first few years of my career, to be honest. So I was only there for about 10 months, I think. And it was not because I wasn't enjoying it. It was a great place to be. I've still got friends who work there now, but I ended up moving back down to Cornwall, more to save up for save a bit of money and for a trip that I had planned a little bit later. And so yeah, ended up working in a small little private practice in Newlyn, which is a small fishing village right down in the southwest of Cornwall. And yeah, again, another great experience. It was only 2 or 3 physios. We had a little hydrotherapy pool. You know, we had a couple of small little dumbbells here and there. We didn't have a ton of equipment, but again, surrounded by some good physios there who taught me a lot. But one of the interesting things in that environment was the clinic was owned by someone who was part of one of these kind of fishing families, basically. And I don't know if you've kind of come across fishing much as a profession, but we had a partnership with the local fishing industry, and so we'd get these fishermen come in, and they had free physiotherapy basically, and fishing is just an absolutely crazy industry. It's after the military, it's the most dangerous job that you can get, and from a fatality perspective. And these guys, they talk about being able to take a bit of a beating. They're working 16 days straight out at sea, like 20 hours a day, back-breaking work, all kinds of conditions, and not people that are interested in talking to doctors and medical people. So it's a big issue really in people having health issues that would not necessarily come in to see a physio or a doctor. So we were literally on the dock basically in terms of the clinic. So it was a really good lesson for me as a young physio to see, how resilient the human body can be and resilient people can be, even when they're in pain. They'd still be like, yeah, going out on the boats tonight. Had one kid, he was probably about 18, came in to see me. He was literally bent over in half, like with back pain, couldn't stand up straight. I was quite concerned about him, and I said, look, you can't continue working like this. This is ridiculous. And I said, look, we need to get you in to see your GP and all these kinds of things. And he just said, look, I've got to pay the bill somehow. So I don't know. He never actually came back to see me, probably because he didn't like what I had to say. But it was just a different mindset of individual, and I think that taught me a lot in terms of actually, the human body can be quite resilient. We don't want to be stupid with it, obviously, but it was a really interesting, psychographic of people to work with, I guess.
Yeah, no, I can imagine. So, yeah, the big shift, even though you've grown up there, going from one of the biggest cities in the world back to a more parochial, smaller environment. And so, how did that work then with the fishermen? So, were you subsidised to do that work for them, or?
Yeah. So it was. I'm not sure exactly who it was, but they have various kind of like unions and things like that. So because injuries are obviously a big problem in terms of if they're injured, they can't work, and sometimes wait lists in the NHS don't really work with shift work and things like that in terms of fishing. So yeah, it was something that was necessary for them basically.
Yeah, and then where did you move to?
So after that, was there for about a year, and then moved back up to London, and started working for Connect Health. So was in Camden at the time. So yeah, moved up to kind of North London area. And again, that was very similar to the first role. So an NHS job, but working for a private company. And yeah, that was an interesting experience, challenging, set of patients again, real kind of mixture. But again, a good team to be around. I think that was probably a good place to start to develop a little bit, having a few years of physio kind of under my belt. But yeah, I suppose as well, it was a tough environment. It was kind of the first time I think that I'd probably seen, physio burnout. Quite a lot of my team that I was working in struggled with the amount of kind of workload that we had and the environment that we were working in. And I think as a profession, I know a lot of my friends and colleagues. It can get tough, right, as a physio, and it's dealing with people and the things that they're going through and supporting people. So yeah, it was a good experience. I was there for a couple of years, but it was definitely a challenging place as well.
Yeah, Connected, we've got loads of places, haven't they? There's quite a few of these big private companies that are doing a lot of NHS work. Yeah, how do you see that growing, like with the state of the NHS at the moment?
Yeah, I'm not too sure, to be honest. It's not necessarily something I have a lot of involvement in nowadays. I think it's tough because I think the NHS, more than likely, with the government that we have currently, I imagine it probably is going to grow. But it just depends, I think, on really demonstrating value, I think, in terms of the service that's provided. I think Connect really push a lot in terms of the data that they try and collect, which I think is really, really important. I think as a profession, maybe we're not always the best at being able to demonstrate our value sometimes. And that's really difficult because we're not necessarily able to take a blood test and say, yeah, you've had this improvement from 1 week to the next. It's a lot more subjective and qualitative in terms of the results that we get. But that being said, I think it's really crucial, and that's been been a big thing for us within ACLs, is that we know from an ACL perspective and from a performance side of things, it's a lot more measurable because we're looking at strength numbers and we're tracking, hypertrophy or jump height or whatever it might be. And so from a patient perspective as well, we're able to really demonstrate, you've been doing this training plan for the last 6 weeks. This was your testing data to begin with. This is your testing data now. You've improved by 20% or 30% in these numbers. And I think as a patient, that's really motivating, and you can really see, actually, yeah, I've improved significantly, and this is worthwhile doing. And I think maybe in an environment like the NHS, where it's more of a pain and more of a function focus, it can be harder to track and monitor that. But there's some good outcome measures, which I know we use something called EQ5D, which we used to hand out to patients and say, at the beginning of your care, complete the questionnaire. When you finish the questionnaire, when you finish your care, complete the questionnaire, and then we can track the outcome. And I think, companies maybe are a little bit more forced to demonstrate that value and track things a little bit more accurately. But at the same time, if they don't have a big budget, then they're going to potentially be squeezed a little bit as well. And so it's tough, I think. It's just tough. It's just difficult with either situation to provide, the best possible level of service, and that's not necessarily something that can always be provided. I remember one of my bosses once said, we're not necessarily here to provide the Ferrari service, because we aren't a Ferrari in terms of the NHS. We're just trying to provide the steady, reliable service of your Peugeot or something like that. So yeah, it's a tricky situation in the NHS.
What were your thoughts when he said that?
I knew where it's coming from. I think it's more probably from a budget perspective, from a wait list perspective. It's not necessarily something that I think, and a lot of people are leaving the NHS, sadly, right, in terms of practitioners, as they get to a certain point in their career, thinking, am I being a little bit restricted in terms of the actual value and service that I can provide? I think that's probably how I felt a little bit at times, in terms of, I remember having an ACL when I was working in one of these NHS environments, and my next appointment's in 6 weeks. Here's a few exercises to keep you going until then. And for someone who's trying to get back to a high level of sport, that just it's not really fit for purpose. They're not really going to get the results that we need to. There's some great NHS environments that help ACLs, and there's a great unit in Liverpool that have, all kinds of tech and all that kind of stuff. But if we look at the demands that are placed on the NHS, it's not always fit for purpose for people who are trying to get back to high level activity. And so, I guess that's really where what I wanted to create with ACL Rehab Online was, it's private. Unfortunately, people have got to pay for it. But is there a way that we can provide, as close to gold standard care as possible? Because that obviously is really fulfilling and satisfying, and just provides great results for clients as well.
Yeah, and I saw on your CV that you work with the Democratic Republic of Congo.
Yeah, that was a good experience. So that was a bit coming back to what I said earlier, in terms of, if you're on social media, if you're kind of shouting a little bit about what you do and talking about an area of interest, it seems that opportunities will kind of come your way a little bit. And so a guy who's a strength and conditioning coach, based in London, big in the kind of basketball scene, just messaged me out of the blue one day and said, can I call you? And I was like, okay. We hadn't really spoken before, and I was like, I imagine he's got someone who's torn an ACL. And so we had a quick call, and he was like, hey, I've seen what you're doing on social media. I work with the DRC's national basketball team, and we've got a World Cup qualifying window in 2 weeks' time in Tunisia. Do you want to join the team? The coach had asked him to find a physio, and he had seen my stuff online and didn't really know anyone else, I guess. And so again, being able to work remotely, having a bit of a team at the time who could take up some of the slack for me, I had a chat with my partner, and I was like, yeah, cool, sounds good, let's do it. So yeah, that was last summer. We went out to Tunisia for 2.5 weeks. And yeah, it was an awesome experience, just working with the teams, training camp, and then followed by World Cup qualifying tournament as well. So yeah, working with some athletes and coaches from the NBA, from the first division in France and Spain, and some players who play in some of the African basketball leagues as well. And we got to play some great teams, and yeah, it was basketball's my sport. I've played basketball since I was about 12, so he didn't actually know that at the time, but I was buzzing, so it's great.
Yeah, no, that does sound like a really interesting experience then. So just like, what was the scale of these athletes then? Were they absolutely massive?
Yeah, so we actually played in the window. We played South Sudan, and in South Sudan, I think I'm correct in saying this. They have like the tallest tribe in the world, so the tallest people in the world. And so I remember sitting in the hotel. All the teams were in the hotel. This guy walked in, and he must have been probably 7'3", 7'4". He literally was, stooping to get around the place. On our team, we had probably maybe 2 or 3 7-footers, and then obviously everyone's 6'5", 6'6", something like that. So yeah, and we had one guy who came in late, actually plays for Golden State Warriors at the moment. He's one of their young rookies, and just the athleticism just is absolutely crazy. So yeah, awesome experience. It was really cool.
Yeah. What did he think of Steph Curry then?
I didn't ask. I was trying to be professional. But yeah, I imagine he had a good amount of positive things to say about good old Steph.
Yeah. Yeah, and so then you Pure was your last job before you got into it. So what were like the key things at Pure? Because I've spoken with quite a few people. We've done some work with some of the sports medicine consultants there as well. Amazing setup, very good reputation. Like, how was that, and how did you get that job?
So it was awesome. It was great. Really, really enjoyed working at Pure. I highly recommend it as a place for anyone, thinking about it. I had actually a student at the time, was a sports massage therapist at Pure. He was a physio student, and he was working with me at Connect. And I said to him, I was like, "Oh, that's awesome that you work at Pure. I'd love to work there one day." And he said, "Oh, I know Sam, one of the kind of directors. I'll ask him if they've got any opportunities going." And so he kind of sent my CV in for me, and then I sent in a cover letter and got invited in for interview. And yeah, so kind of a little bit of kind of who I suppose in that instance. Uh, but yeah, think I was about 3.5 years qualified at the time. And yeah, interviewed for that role and started working in the bank clinic. And it was great. I think the thing that Claire, who set Pure up, and the rest of the team, they really wanted to bring in this kind of multidisciplinary environment of sports docs, S&C coaches, your physios, Pilates, massage therapists, and create that kind of professional sport environment for the public. And I think they do that really, really well. And I know that I've taken a lot of inspiration from that, because working in the same corridor as people like your James Noakes or AJ Sethi, some really great sports doctors, being able to pop your head around the in the door and ask them some questions and get just a really high level answer is just amazing for like your knowledge and learning. But also being on the gym floor with really experienced physios, who have worked in elite sport and understand strength and conditioning, and also having strength and conditioning coaches there. I think the strength and conditioning world is fascinating to me, and we've got strength and conditioning coaches. Our head of performance at ACL Rehab Online is a guy called Paul Reed, who's S&C coach and academic, and done a lot of work within ACL. But us physios have got a huge amount to learn from that environment, from a performance environment, and that's been really invaluable for me, helping athletes get back to that kind of high performance level as well.
Mm. So both from you being when you've been interviewed, but when you're looking to build your team out, what are the non-clinical skills that you look for, or do you think that people do look for to be good at whatever role it is?
Yeah, I think from a non-clinical perspective, I think they're probably the most important things. You can know everything under the sun in terms of textbook and theory, but if you can't translate that to a patient, then it's completely irrelevant, basically. So I was thinking about this kind of before coming on the podcast, but I think the best practitioners that I've worked with are the ones that patients feel that they've really been listened to. And I think if a patient feels like you've actually listened to what they've said and you've connected and even maybe repeated it back to them and said, "So what you're saying, from my understanding, is this, this, and this. Is that a correct reflection of what you feel is going on?" I think a patient can then kind of almost breathe a sigh of relief and say, actually, yeah, this person isn't just going off on a tangent based on their experience, but actually they understand what my problem is. And so I think, yeah, really good listening skills, good questioning skills, but then also being able to have a bit of a laugh with people, connect with people as well. And the best clinicians that I've worked with, even as a student, people are going through really tough times, right? In injury, maybe they're in hospital. But if you can have a bit of a laugh with someone and make them smile a little bit, then they're going to leave that interaction with a really positive feeling. So I think, yeah, developing those skills as a therapist, or as anyone really, is going to have a massive impact on the buy-in that patient has, and their compliance with what you're telling them to do, so, or asking them to do. So yeah, I think being able to listen, being able to ask you questions, and then be able to explain well, not in super complicated terms, but analogies and stories and things like that, is really helpful.
Yeah, and do you do any work yourself online in terms of professional development, again, outside the clinical world? So whether it's books or podcasts or any things that you find help you with your own development?
Yeah, for sure. So I suppose from a communication perspective, one of the best things that I did early on, probably when I first graduated, I did a course by a guy called Mike Stewart. You may be familiar with. He's runs a course called No Pain, KNOW, and it was really impactful to me because he talked a lot about using analogies and trying to connect with people through communication, really, and asking questions. Other things that I suppose I do at the moment come a little bit more in the sales arena, I suppose. Sales can be a bit of a dirty word sometimes and come across as sleazy, but you'll know in terms of business, it's not about trying to bend someone over and take all their money away. It's about trying to connect with people and ask good questions and understand what their problems are. Motivational interviewing, that kind of things, is very similar. So I work with a mentor who kind of helps me with that from a sales side of things, and I've done various other kind of mentorships around communication, or that's been a big part of certain mentorships I've done.
Well, I think even in what you said about when you're speaking to your patient, essentially you're listening to them, then getting them to buy into what you're saying. So it's essentially is sales, isn't it? Everything's sales in its own way. You're trying to understand what the demands are, and then you trying to meet them with what you can add value with.
Yeah, 100%. And a friend of mine, Charlie Goodchild, who a colleague of mine at Pure, he kind of did a talk for us as a team a few months ago. It was talking about this concept of a physio coach, and that's really what I say to patients who are interested in joining us, is like, we're not your physios who are going to give you just a bunch of exercises. We're your coaches who are here to support and answer your questions and reassure you and dive into things. And yeah, I think there's a big crossover with coaching, with sales, with team building. It's just about what do you actually want, like what are you here for? Because sometimes we never actually ask that question. We just go down the knee pain route or the whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, well, no, it is but like you said before about it is a bit of a dirty word, and like people don't want to speak to salespeople or whatever. But ultimately, you're all trying to contribute to drive things forward. Hopefully that's what it is, rather than just trying to fleece people out of money. You don't last very long if you're just trying to do that anyway.
Yeah, exactly, and that's it. And it's about if they feel that that's the big thing I've learned, I think, in the last 6 months, is that just asking simple questions like, oh, they said, oh, yeah, I'm struggling a bit with my mental health, or this is impacting the way I'm feeling. Just instead of saying, oh, yeah, that's a really common thing that people experience going through ACL injury, mental health, etc. Just saying, oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Can you tell me a bit more about that? And then just simply asking simple questions. And I know we've probably heard all of this kind of thing before, but just simply asking those simple, opening questions of, can you just tell me a bit more, or what did you mean by that? Instead of kind of putting your own spin on what they've said, often the floodgates really open and they suddenly kind of open up to you in all these different kinds of ways, which is then great because you can actually understand what their big worries are. What's your biggest worry is a great question that Charlie kind of spoke to us about. That often, opens up that conversation for something a bit deeper as well.
Yeah, and then from your perspective then, so now you're working remotely pretty much all the time. How do you find that? Do you miss social interaction? What's it been like for you?
Yeah, good question. I think it's definitely a challenge. It's I always enjoyed working in clinics, corridor conversations with colleagues and going out for a drink after work or popping out for a coffee it is really nice. For me, I think I'm really kind of invested in the business, in the patients, and it's a really big passion area for me. So it's totally fine. I have a good network of people online that I speak to regularly. Some people speak to on a kind of almost daily basis about how things are going, and it's probably shifted a bit from the colleagues that are working in the same business to other people running similar businesses as well, or working in similar environments. And the challenges that I suppose I'm facing on a day-to-day are more in that arena at the moment. And so talking to other people going through the same kind of things can be helpful. And then having a strong support network of friends outside of work is I suppose the way that I get a little bit more social interaction these days, and playing sport and things like that as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I can see there's good and challenging things from remote working. But yeah, no, it is nice. And then finally, what do you see as your vision for the business?
So I think the main thing for us is just about providing the best possible care that we can from an ACL perspective to as many athletes as we can, having a big impact, I suppose, on individuals, but also on the profession. So at the moment, we've kind of got a few things in the works. So our plan is to standardize a little bit in terms of some of the testing and data collection that we have within the business at the moment. And again, Paul, my colleague, has come in to kind of lead on that a little bit, but we're hoping to eventually publish some work looking at the outcomes that we get in terms of with our athletes, and also then once we have a bit of published data as to say actually the way that we're doing certain ACL rehab maybe has a better outcome compared to a traditional approach or whatever it might be, creating some educational materials on that as well. So looking at not just necessarily from an ACL perspective, but how can physios who are interested in it develop more and more in that kind of performance mindset, and working with athletes, bridging that gap from rehab back to sport and things like that. So yeah, I think the main thing at the moment is just continuing to deliver good service for the athletes, and then hopefully creating some educational services around that as well.
No, it sounds great. Well, I really appreciate you sharing your story, and I've been watching your stuff online for some time now. So it's really good to hear about the motivations and how and why you got into it. And you can tell how driven you are to do it. So good luck with everything, and I look forward to seeing how you develop over the next few years.
Thanks, Andy. Appreciate you having me on. It's been great to chat.
No problem. And last question: is that an ET statue you've got there? Or is that?
I actually have no idea. I'm in an Airbnb, so you have to ask the landlord.
Been looking at that, thinking, yeah, no, it probably isn't that. Yeah, don't know how big that is in Portugal these days.
Yeah.
Yeah, brilliant. All right, go and enjoy some Vino Verde, and appreciate your time, Ben.
Thanks, Andy.
Thank you.